All right, welcome everybody. Happy Friday. It's been a another difficult week in the market as this war continues to rage and investors remain incredibly skittish, and they're fed really, I think, some pretty inaccurate information from the media. So the panic just seems to persist. So. The title today is Everything is Iran, and that is really true. No matter what economic data comes out, whatever news uh, emerges, the only thing is that on investors' minds anyway, is this war, and specifically how the war is impacting the price of oil. And as long as oil is hovering close to $100 a barrel or higher, investors remain incredibly nervous and continue to sell equities. So that's where we are. But there's this belief that has been around for decades that diplomacy is the way to resolve all problems in the world. And even when you confront dangerous, evil actors that have revisionist views of the world, revisionist meaning they want to conquer territory and reset the world order to grab more and more power and make the world in their image, um, like the Ayatollahs in Iran want to do, that you can negotiate with these people and resolve danger and all national security problems with negotiation. And if you just offer these types of governments more money, more favors, that they operate just like normal democracies. They are reasonable people, and you can resolve difficulties and struggles and avoid war. But these ideas of diplomacy always works, negotiation always works, these ideas have failed miserably. And that's actually the very reason why we're at war today. Because Iran was just amassing more and more dangerous weapons to attack their neighbors and ultimately to attack us. No one in the United States wants to believe it. They never want to believe that Iran would ever launch missiles at U.S. shores, but that is just absolute naivete. So right now, I believe we are in the most potentially the most important geopolitical realignment since the fall of the Berlin Wall back, and the fall of communism back in the late 80s and early 90s. And very interestingly, we are seeing that for all intents and purposes, Russia and China have stepped back from supporting their ally in Iran. Yes, we hear that Russia may be supplying some intelligence to Iran. That's in all likelihood true, but really, no, neither Russia or China are stepping in a way that could really provide significant support that could change the outcome of this war. And this is part of this incredible political alignment. Iran is really left to its own devices. It's totally isolated in the world. And the Gulf states and the all Arab countries in the Middle East are effectively siding with the United States and implicitly with Israel as well against Iran. And it's really only the Democratic Party and some isolationist elements in the Republican Party, as well as the majority of the media and many people on social media that are Iran's useful idiots, and they are doing the bidding for Iran. and indirectly doing the bidding. When you do the bidding for Iran, you're doing the work that China and Russia essentially refused to do, by providing real military support for Iran. And you could argue, and I do believe that Americans in general, have a weak stomach, that we really don't have a lot of stamina and grit for tough, hard battles like we're experiencing now. But more than that, more than just having, lacking grit and having a weak stomach, you have a lot of the media. And as I said, the Democratic Party, even they don't say it openly, implicitly, they're rooting for the failure of the United States military. That's really what is going on here. And they're actually pretending that we're in the midst of seeing a failure. But the truth couldn't be, it couldn't, their ideas, what they're presenting to the United States and the media, their idea that the US military is failing could not be further from the truth. Um, so not only is the American public being deceived, but investors, and for our purposes, watching the stock market continue to go down, investors are being deceived. Now, as I mentioned, the real source of concern as it relates to investors is oil prices. And the battle in terms of oil is really taking place in the Strait of Hormuz, where at least 20% of the world's global oil supply travels through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, does Iran truly have total control over the strait? Uh, Perhaps. But I'm going to argue that that control is very tenuous and it probably will not last very long. Probably in the coming days or at most in the coming weeks, the United States is going to seize control of the strait and we're going to see oil prices at worst stabilize and more likely come down. And certainly a few months from now, oil prices will be significantly lower than where they are right now. But that is not the perception, right? The perception among investors is that the Strait of Hormuz is firmly in the control of Iran, and that's why oil prices are where they are. And sometimes, at least for a period of time, perception becomes reality. So what is the reality though? How should we think about the Strait of Hormuz? Well, Iran's strategy uh, is that it relies heavily on what's called asymmetric naval warfare, right? We have enormously large and powerful warships, but Iran doesn't. Iran does, in fact, their navy is essentially sitting at the bottom of the ocean. So instead, what does Iran rely on? They rely on a network of smaller and harder to target systems, including fast attack boats. They have hundreds of these fast attack boats designed to swarm. And with those attack boats, they can also drop sea mines. They also have unmanned surface vessels, and they use drones and shore-based anti-ship missile batteries in order to attack ships that would be traveling through the Strait of Hormuz. So these are really their capabilities. And their capabilities are specifically designed to disrupt shipping and to create global economic pressure. And it's really not so they can defeat the US Navy outright, but it's to create this chaos and make the world feel as though they have total control of this over the strait, and there's nothing that the United States or anyone else can do about it. And they hope to therefore create the perception that the Strait of Hormuz will be blocked for a long, protracted period of time. And with that, Their goal is to keep oil prices high and to create pressure on President Trump to have all global leaders and the American public scream at Trump and tell him to end this war. Well, what is the United States' strategy here? Well, the first phase of our response is already underway. And the objective is straightforward. The objective is to reduce Iran's ability to disrupt traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. And according to U.S. Central Command, American forces have already conducted strikes against thousands of Iranian military targets connected to this conflict. Uh, U.S. Central Command has reported that U.S. operations have struck at this point about 6,000 targets, probably more as of today, and they have destroyed approximately 90 Iranian vessels, including more than 60 ships and over 30 mine-laying boats involved in, trying to disrupt the Strait of Hormuz. These strikes that the US is launching are aimed at dismantling the infrastructure that Iran uses to threaten shipping. Now, Iranian naval vessels operating near the strait, are being destroyed on a daily basis. Drone ships and unmanned maritime systems are being targeted. Fast attack boats used to swarm and attack are being eliminated. These mine-laying vessels and mine stockpiles are being struck even before they can deploy additional weapons. Shore-based anti-missile batteries along Iran's coastline are also being targeted, right? All this is going on right now. U.S. Central Command has also issued warnings, urging Iranian civilians, to stay away from Iranian coastal areas and ports and all kinds of maritime facilities along the Persian Gulf. And that's because we're going to be hitting these areas very, very hard, right? These type of warnings always precede or accompany sustained military operations against infrastructure connected to attacks on shipping. So all this is beginning to gain intensity right now. Once Iran's ability to disrupt traffic is sufficiently reduced, and that day is coming, right? I don't know if that is a few days away, a week away, but that day is coming. And once it happens, the next phase will begin. And Scott Bessent just yesterday talked about this phase. And he stated that the U.S. Navy, potentially alongside navies of our allies, perhaps some European countries, will begin to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz. And they will do it as soon as it becomes military feasible. Now, there's a report today in the Wall Street Journal and some other newspapers that the United States was caught off guard by Iran's plans to try to close the Strait of Hormuz. This couldn't be further from the truth. The plan that is underway now and is being implemented to deal with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, these plans have been in the making for months, if not years. And the operational concept is pretty straightforward. You have commercial vessels assemble in staging areas on both sides of the straits, right? So you're going to have on both sides of the straits, you're going to have naval ships who will be accompanying ships carrying oil and other products, right? So that's how this escort system is going to work. You're going to have ships on both sides of an oil ship, for example. Now, this is not the first time the United States has done something like this. During the late stages of the Iran-Iraq War, which took place in the 1980s, Iran began attacking commercial shipping. In that Iran-Iraq war, this part of it became known as the Tanker War because Iran kept attacking international shipping going through the strait. And they also laid naval mines throughout the Persian Gulf, also in an attempt to disrupt maritime traffic and pressure Gulf states that were supporting Iraq. So, in response to these attacks by Iran in the late 1980s, President Reagan launched an operation in 1987, and it was one of the largest naval convoy operations since World War II. The United States began escorting Kuwaiti oil tankers through the Gulf under U.S. naval protection. And this operation continued for more than a year. So we have good experience. We know exactly how to do this, and we did it successfully. So there's no reason to think that we can't draw upon that experience and do it again and do it successfully, just like we did back in the late 1980s. So Iran has disrupted shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. And it's certainly, I don't believe, as Scott Bessent yesterday said, that we have no evidence. The reports that they have laid mines in the Strait of Hormuz, he said it's not true. But even if they have, those mines, if they do disrupt traffic, it will be temporary. And the missile attacks that we're seeing, the harassment of commercial vessels, yes, it's disrupted the oil market, caused the stock market to decline. But these limited attacks will be temporary, just like they were temporary in the late 1980s. We know how to deal with it. We've dealt with it before. We will deal with it again. Deal with it again. To think that Iran could be successful, okay? Though there's many people who argue Iran is going to be successful. Imagine that. To be successful, Iran would have to defeat the most powerful navy in the world, operating in one of the regions where it has spent decades preparing to fight, right? We've been planning, our US Navy and our US military have had plans to wage war with Iran for decades, right? This is something that we didn't just come up with overnight. So the largest navy who's been thinking about this for decades, to think that Iran, that is getting clobbered, is going to beat us, hard to imagine. So yes, the coming weeks may still be dangerous. It's possible that if they haven't laid mines, they will lay some mines. Those mines could certainly damage our ships. Drones or missiles may even strike our tankers, entirely possible. But as long as the United States follows a similar playbook that they used in the 1980s, first destroying Iran's ability to threaten shipping, and then escorting these oil vessels safely through the strait, this waterway will reopen. It is simply a matter of time, right? Again, Iran has tried to disrupt the Strait of Hormuz before, and history suggests it will not succeed this time either. And by the way, the USS Ford, which has been docked in Israeli waters, is now moving toward the Strait of Hormuz. Why? To prepare for these escorts. So let's move on to the war itself. Well, this is the war itself, but other parts of the war. There have
Can I
been
ask a
so many
question?
leaks to the press that have been aimed at trying to undermine the U.S. military. Now, these leaks are not just coming from people outside of the administration. There's even people within the Trump administration who oppose this war, right? There's definitely a group of isolationists. They didn't favor engaging in this war, and they certainly want to get us out as soon as possible. And that's true of people inside the intelligence apparatus as well. People at the Defense Department, or the renamed the Department of War, people inside the CIA. You definitely have, people who have been in government for many years who oppose Trump. There's people who oppose Israel, and want nothing to do with this war. And they constantly leak to the press false stories that the US is running into one obstacle after another, and this is turning into a real quagmire. But uh, but these reports are false. And the most recent report that supposedly a supposed report that was leaked from the intelligence community is that regime change in Iran simply can't happen. Well, I argue, and it's not just me who argues this, but people inside the US military argue, look, we don't know if regime change is going to happen. You can't really predict that it's going to happen, but to predict that it absolutely won't happen is absurd. It's simply not knowable if regime change is going to happen. Why is that? Why is it not knowable that regime change, is not going to happen? Because on the face of it, it looks like Iran has this strong, sturdy, repressive apparatus, right? The IRGC and the Basij. These are topics we've talked about, and they are deeply ideological. As we've seen, they have no problem opening up fire and murdering thousands and tens of thousands of Iranian people in cold blood on the streets, right? And the more they feel pressure, the more desperate they're going to become, and they're likely to become even more and more violent, right? So I think those who think that there's not going to be regime change have this concept in mind. But here's what people who have this view are not appreciating. The US military and the Israeli military have methodically been destroying Iran's missiles and drones, their stock of missiles and drones. But beyond that, they are destroying their manufacturing program, right? So there's the stockpile of missiles and drones, but then there's the ability to make those missiles and drones, which Iran took decades to make, right? This big supply chain. And we're very systematically destroying that capacity to rebuild and replenish their missiles and drones, right? The supply chain system is being absolutely wiped out. So yes, they still have a stockpile that's shrinking, that's diminishing. It's becoming less and less every single day. But they still have that stockpile, right? They can still launch missiles. And sometimes you'll see reports of a big flurry of missiles and drones that hit targets. Again, that's happening less and less. But their ability to restock that diminishing stockpile is almost gone because we're taking out that manufacturing system. And it will take years and years and years to rebuild that manufacturing system. So the media and all the skeptics and all the people rooting really implicitly for Iran, they are not taking this into account, right? They think because they see Iran get off a missile or a flurry of missiles that that's going to go on indefinitely. But no, the stockpile is diminishing and the ability to replenish those weapons has been wiped out. How do I know this? Because I listen to people in the US Pentagon, in the Department of Defense. I listen to people that are in the Israeli Department of Defense, people who are outside of the Department of Defense but understand these topics in tremendous depth. I read them, I listen to them, and that's the truth, right? So the IRGC and the Besiege are getting hit very hard, and they will get hit even harder as the days go by. Their communication systems have largely been taken out. Yes, they still have their accounts on Twitter, on X. They can still speak to TV, but their ability to communicate with one another has been severely hampered. And by the way, when it comes to making appearances on TV, we're seeing very few human beings showing up. And really, we're just seeing figures of, AI figures. So that tells you something. These guys are not really even showing their faces on TV very frequently anymore. Once in a while, you'll see a real human being, but mostly we're seeing AI. That tells us that they're losing confidence. They're afraid to show their heads because they're afraid they're going to get taken out. And they are have lost command and control abilities, communication abilities, and this really reduces their ability to fight effectively. So yes, they still retain an ability to wage war, but it's diminishing. Now, most importantly, their ability to wage war that is has greatest capacity at this point is not to fight against the United States and Israel and to launch wars at their Arab neighbors. That is really being reduced. But they still have the capacity to kill their own civilians, right? To kill the Iranian people. That's where they continue to be most dangerous and most lethal. Um, Now, it's important to note, I've heard people ask the question, what has actually surprised the US military? Were you surprised by their closure of the Strait of Hormuz? No, we fully expected that, and we have a plan to deal with it. The only thing that has caught the American military off guard and the Israeli military off guard is that Kuwait, which is a friendly country to the United States, they accidentally shot down three fighter jets, right? That's really the only surprise, negative surprise, that's happened so far in this war. Everything else is actually happening as good or better than what was planned. And that's the reality. Now, again, I want to go back. I want to return to this concept that the conventional wisdom is that you can't, regime change is impossible. And certainly you can't do regime change unless you put US or Israeli boots on the ground, right? There's no way you can cause a regime change from the air. Okay. Again, this is not good analysis. Why is this not good analysis? Because we are witnessing the most complex, tech-driven, AI-driven military action in history. And all of it is seamlessly coordinated between the United States and Israel. We are seeing jets and drones and intelligence, very sophisticated targeting techniques. Some of these intelligence and targeting techniques are coming from Israeli innovation. Some of it is coming from US innovation. The coordination and the sophistication that we're seeing is going to go down in history as something remarkable and something that will be studied for years to come. And it's only going to get better. But this is the first time we're seeing it in with such high level sophistication, right? The integration of AI and all these new technologies. So the question really should be is, not with this certainty that you need boots on the ground if you have, first of all, regime change is impossible, right? That's number one. That's the first conventional piece of wisdom. But then if you have any chance at all, you need American or Israeli boots on the ground. But with all this technology, the real question is, can you break a regime with technology, with this maximum accuracy that we've never seen before? Our weapons striking targets with pinpoint accuracy, with maximum speed, hitting targets in the blink of an eye. And the reason why it's so foolish for people to conclude that we can't see regime change is because nobody can predict what we've never seen before, right? We've never seen the kinds of intelligence and technology and the combination of intelligence and technology that we're seeing right now. And I'm speaking about it only because I hear about it from, secondhand and third hand, but I can't appreciate it, right? I'm not a pilot sitting, using all this brand new technology, right? The stuff that is going on is absolutely mind-blowing. And there's no one who's on the outside who can really appreciate it. So to think a journalist has any clue or an academic sitting at a Ivy League university can make a prediction about regime change is absurd. It's completely absurd. Furthermore, from a military standpoint, we've talked about from a cultural standpoint, we've compared Iran, which is a far more cohesive country, not totally cohesive. No, they do have differences and ethnic differences, but to compare Iran with Iraq, and we failed in Iraq, to compare those two from a demographic standpoint, Iraq being very sectarian, very divided. So that's a bad comparison. But just from a military standpoint, to compare Iran and leave out the differences between the war in Iran today versus the war in Iraq in the early 2000s, today it's like science fiction comparing our capabilities that we had to fight the Iraq war in the early 2000s, right? It is science fiction. Today we have tremendous technological creativity, sophisticated operations that are beyond our imaginations, intelligence, the ability, the way the Israelis have penetrated the Iranian apparatus, the regime, to be able to be pinpoint and targeting the leader of Iran, the supreme leader of Iran. In the first 5 minutes of the war, they took him out. He was the first person eliminated with pinpoint accuracy. Can you imagine when Israel and the United States want, well, it's really Israel. Israel is the one in charge of taking out, assassinating people to the regime. The target can be sitting in a building, and Israel has the technology, the sophistication to shoot a missile through a specific window and take out the individual without touching the rest of the building, right? This happens time and time again. Beyond belief. This is something that could have never been achieved in the early 2000s. These are very recent developments. Not only that, certainly the Mossad and likely the CIA has agents on the ground that are embedded among the Iranian population. Not only that, I've heard we have secure ways to communicate with not only our agents, but Iranians themselves, who are trying to topple the regime. Can you imagine? We have ways of communicating with regular Iranians who want to overthrow the regime. And in fact, Iranians themselves are telling us where some of our targets are, right? We have secure ways of communicating with Iranians walking on the streets, and they're aiding us in this war. These things were unimaginable just a few years ago. So we have total or near total air supremacy. With this total air supremacy, we are going to be able to monitor neighborhoods throughout Iran, throughout the entire country, to see exactly what's going on in detail in each little neighborhood, to help protesters. We will be able to airdrop materials to them. When I say materials, it could be weapons, whatever we think they may need. When I say we, I mean the United States and the Israelis. We'll be able to smuggle materials to them through Iran's porous borders. And all of this technology and our intelligence and our connections with the Iranian population, all of this will be activated at some point at the key moment in order to empower the population. So this capacity is much more effective than putting US boots on the ground, which would be a big complication. And it would create a huge uproar in the United States. So it would be counterproductive. But to argue that regime change is impossible, it's absurd. These people have no idea what they're talking about. Now, does this mean that we're going to have regime change? No, it doesn't mean we're going to have regime change. But to think that there's a real possibility, of course there's a real possibility. We can't predict because none of these methods have ever been tried before. We've never had these types of sophisticated technologies. And our intelligence is far beyond anything, and the Israeli intelligence is far beyond anything they've ever had before. So the President Trump is absolutely right to stay the course. The US military is doing extraordinary work. Now, our military experts, right? Our military experts think there are about 15,000 targets that need to be hit in order to have, at least from a military standpoint, to have like, from a military standpoint, to have victory. Okay. To hit 15,000 targets, the estimate is that that should take about 4 to 5 weeks in total. So we've been at this, we meaning the US and Israeli militaries, they've been at this. Tomorrow will mark 2 weeks. So that means we probably have between 2 and 3 more weeks to go. And in 2 to 3 more weeks of striking military targets. And then the time will come to call the Iranian people into the streets. So we have much more to do. Now, I just want to say a couple more things about the coordination between the US and Israeli militaries, because you hear so many people, right, saying we spend way too much money on Israel. We are too much aid, $3 billion in aid and so many people say, oh, what an enormous amount of money. The truth is $3 billion is peanuts. It's like 0.001% of the size of our GDP. It's a tiny little speck of our budget. It's very small. But what are we getting out of that $3 billion? Well, let me say this, and this is just a tiny little example. There's many, many, many examples. But Israel has US. Oh, by the way, when they get money from the US, and with that money, they have to spend almost all of it on purchases of US military equipment. So any aid that we give to Israel comes right back into the United States and funds the US military industry, right? So it's almost as if the United States is paying the US military, but they give that money to Israel, then Israel spends on the US military. So with that money, Israel buys all kinds of military equipment, including F-35 jets, F-15s, F-16s. And what does Israel do with it? They add all kinds of bells and whistles based on their war fighting experience, because Israel fights in many more wars than the United States, and they get experience. And with that experience, they see where these jets need improvement, what failed, what worked well, what could be improved, and then they make those improvements. And those improvements get passed back to the United States. So we get the benefit of fighting wars without fighting wars, right? Our equipment improves from war fighting because The Israelis have the experience, and we benefit from that. Then with AI gets applied to our defense technologies, and AI gets applied to our targeting capabilities and to our intelligence systems. And this new technology, they get infused into our jets and into Israeli jets. And then guess what happens? Our jets are able to communicate with Israeli jets in real time. It's not even the pilots. Yes, the pilots communicate with each other, but the jets communicate with each other in real time. This is mind blowing. How do I know this? Because I've heard pilots talk about it. You do your homework. The people in the press don't do their homework. They have an agenda that they want to sell. They want the United States military to fail, and they have no idea what's going on in terms of technology and the coordination, the unbelievable coordination between the US military and the Israeli military. So we are creating this incredible defense system that improves, right, enormously through coordination with the Israelis. So people complain about this 3 billion in military aid to Israel, but the return on investment is really unbelievable. Okay, just going back to Iran, okay, the war with Iran. Iran is certainly in disarray. And I mentioned that they're now using AI to communicate because they're afraid to show up on TV themselves. In fact, their new leader, Moshtaba Khamenei, this was yesterday was the big day where he was going to appear and make a big statement. Now, did he appear? He didn't appear. Did he release a statement? Well, somebody released a statement. There was a statement, and his name was attached to the statement, but no one saw him. No one heard him. He didn't speak. No one even sent pictures of him. They did send pictures, but they were very old pictures. So we don't even know what he looks like. Now, there are all kinds of rumors. Some rumors are that, the New York Times and CNN, they reported that he's a little scratched up and he's got a broken leg. Probably untrue, right? CNN defending the Iranians once again. Uh, there's other rumors that he's in a coma and he lost a leg. There's other rumors that he's not even alive. It's impossible to know. What we do know is the leadership is in disarray. And if Moshtaba Khamenei is the leader, he's likely in very bad shape. Now, the Iranian regime, even though they're in huge disarray, we know that they will do their best to violently repress their own population. And right now, the biggest enemy of Iran is the Iranian people because they're the ones, yes, with our support, but they're the ones that pose the greatest threat to the regime. They're the ones that ultimately have the capacity to overthrow the government. And the time is coming. The time is coming. As I said, it's probably still several weeks away. But the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the Crown Prince of Iran, who lives in the United States, Reza Pahlavi, both of them just yesterday spoke directly to the Iranian population, and they both used similar words, saying, the time is near for you to play your role. And the Iranian regime senses it. They sense it. How do we know they sense it? Because they're beginning to deploy their forces into universities that have been big areas of protest. They're beginning to deploy their forces into cities, the major cities that have been key areas of protest. So the day is coming. In the meanwhile, we continue to see the US and the Israeli militaries do profound damage to the regime. They're again taking out their missile systems, taking out their missile launchers, doing damage to their drones. That stock of offensive weaponry is diminishing, and their ability to manufacture and replace that diminishing stock of weapons has been wiped out. So it's a matter of time. It's a matter of time before we regain the Strait of Hormuz. The big question isn't whether ultimately Iran will be absolutely defanged. That's going to happen. The Strait of Hormuz will be liberated. That's going to happen. The real big question, the real big question for people who really understand what's going on is, will the Iranian people be able to bring down the regime? And many experts say the answer is yes. The real question is when. It's going to happen. Is it going to happen in the next couple months? Is it going to happen over the next year? Or is it going to happen over the next few years? But a regime that has been this badly beaten, that cannot deliver any form of governance, that can't deliver economic performance, such a government cannot survive when you have a population that is so determined to get their country back. So let us see if there are any questions or comments.